Hello again, geeks. I am that Gaymer guy, and this week we're discussing the Orlando shootings. Obviously this is a serious subject, so I'm going to try and keep editing to a minimum. So in Orlando, Florida, early on Sunday morning, an Islamic extremist, now named as Omar Mateen, went into Pulse nightclub armed, shot and killed over 50 people and injured many more. He then went on to take hostages, and after the police rescued the hostages, Omar Mateen was killed in the ensuing gunfire. It's since been revealed that Mateen had affiliations with the Islamic State, and they have since stated that they are responsible for the attack, but whether this is true or not is up for debate. But whilst religious extremism and the innate homophobia that tends to come with it is an issue, and one that we're all aware of, the Orlando shootings have brought an awareness to me, and I'm sure many others, of an issue that's a lot more disturbing, and that is the apparent unnewsworthiness of homophobia. And I'm not sure if unnewsworthiness is a word or not, but I'm going to use it. So on Sunday, when I found out about the attack, I went on to BBC News, my news provider of choice, and arguably the most neutral of news organisations. And of course, I expected to see this story as the headline, but it wasn't there. Okay, I was on UK News as opposed to World News, so I click on World News, and even then, it's not the main headline. I scrolled down, and sure enough, there it was as the second or third story. But this alone was enough to annoy me. In the media, the term newsworthy or newsworthiness relates to 5 aspects: timing, significance, proximity, prominence, and human interest. Timing is how recent a story is. The more recent, the more newsworthy. Significance is the amount of people affected in the story. The more people, the more newsworthy. Proximity is how closely we are related to the story. For example, for us, a plane crash in Britain will be deemed more newsworthy than a plane crash in Australia. Prominence is the type of person involved in the story. The more well-known, the more newsworthy. And human interest are stories that appeal to human emotion, either happiness or sadness. The more of these 5 aspects that a story has, the more it is deemed newsworthy. So upon me accessing BBC News, let's go through this list in relation to the Orlando shootings. Timing, it happened the night before. Significance, at that point it was confirmed that at least 30 people had been killed. Proximity, whilst not geographically close to the USA, I would argue that we're at least culturally close enough for this to be relevant. And human interest, a story that appeals to human emotion. I would argue this appeals to human emotion. So that's 4 out of 5 aspects that this story has that defines it as being newsworthy. So why was it not headline news, regardless of whether I was on the UK news site or the World News site? Now, most recently we can compare this to the coverage of the Paris attacks. Obviously more people died and were injured in the Paris attacks, including British citizens, and Paris is itself closer to Britain than the USA is. But it is interesting that the Paris attacks made headline news and continues to make the news. It's even more interesting that I distinctly remember following the Chilean miner crisis on the BBC News website, which itself made headline news, when that story in definitions terms isn't as newsworthy as the Orlando shootings. And of course this isn't to say that any of these stories are more or less important than any of the others. It's just interesting to see what our most neutral news organisation deems more newsworthy. And in America itself, many news organisations seem to omit the fact that the club that had been attacked was a gay club. But why is all this? Well, I would argue that it's because homophobia and homophobic attacks are unnewsworthy. The USA is rife with homophobia and racism, with many right-wing news companies implicitly pushing an anti-gay and anti-Islam agenda. So when a story arises of an Islamic extremist killing gay people, the story is deemed unnewsworthy because the bigots of the USA simply won't care. Take out the fact that the club attacked was a gay club and you've got yourself a story. But what about in Britain? Yes, homophobia still exists and racism still exists, albeit on a much smaller scale. Why is it that this story is unnewsworthy, or at the least less newsworthy than others? If you've been following this story, then you're probably aware of the incident regarding Owen Jones and Sky News, in which Owen Jones, an openly gay journalist, walked off of the set of Sky News when hosts Mark Longhurst and Julia Hartley-Brewer seemingly refused to accept the fact that the Orlando shootings were a homophobic attack. Owen Jones gave the analogy that if a gunman walked into a synagogue and killed 50 Jewish people, there would be no question that the gunman's motives were anti-Semitic. So why is it that a gunman going into a gay club and killing 50 LGBT people isn't being explicitly described as a homophobic attack? Well, I would argue that whilst British news companies themselves don't operate on an anti-gay agenda, they are aware that homophobia does still exist within Britain. And to officially state the Orlando shootings as a homophobic terrorist attack is to compare the beliefs and opinions of an extremist to the beliefs and opinions of the thousands of homophobic people across Britain. It would, in essence, be holding a mirror up to the bigots of Britain and saying your opinion is wrong. And news organisations simply don't want to take that risk. Those are my views on the situation. Please feel free to leave your views down in the comments. Obviously these views could be polarising, so please play nice. And I apologise if this video is a bit longer than normal, but I feel like this needed to be said. But with that, I'll say goodbye. Please like and subscribe if you want to see more. I also write a bi-weekly gaming blog, so if you're interested in that, then I'll leave a link below. And if there's anything gaming, geek or LGBT related that you'd like me to discuss in a future video, then leave a suggestion down in the comments. As ever, I hope to see you guys next time, but until then...
I've had enough of this. Let me go. Sorry.
Owen,
No
genuinely, we're trying to have a civilised conversation.
I
know you're upset. You're upset,
I'm
and you're
very upset.
I'm quite right. Everyone's upset and angry about this, but storming off a TV set